How we normally define ourselves. You know, if someone says, tell me about yourself, or who are you, you know, we tend to, just from a conditioning point of view, tend to launch into presentation of our resume. You know, I've done this, here's my situation, I'm married, I have kids, I'm this old, I'm all these different ways that we define ourselves. This inquiry about I am has to do with the present moment. So let's say, you know, you had a career as a, I don't know, let's just pick engineer, career as an engineer. But in this moment, we're just sitting, right? Are you an engineer in this moment? Or was that a function that this body mind was able to perform at a certain time in our life with a certain amount of training, you know, under a certain circumstance? It's not something we do 24 hours a day, you know, 7 or 8 hours a day. You know, we could be identified as being the sleeper, right, rather than the engineer. So it's something that we may perform. It may be a role that we play, but is it who we are? So it's a different question. So we may have had a 30, 40-year career as a engineer, let's say, and today at this moment that's not happening. And so is it really correct to say that what I am is an engineer, or is it something that this body may have done in the past, but in this present moment, and maybe tomorrow it may function in that way for a period of time, but in this moment it is not who I am, right? So we can also say that about any experience that we've had. You know, we can recite our history, that I did this, I traveled there, I learned, went to this school, I had this experience, I went on this cruise, all of these things. And we can remember those, but it's useful to remember also all of the moments, well, we can't remember them, but to notice that we can't remember the vast majority of moments in our life. We remember some of the moments, but we impose sort of a continuity on that there's something continuous about these experiences that I've strung together, this experience, that memory, and it feels like a continuous life, but there are many, many times more moments, days, weeks that we have no memory of at all. So is that really the basis of how we can define ourselves? That who I am is the memories that I can remember and recite, and well, I'll just forget about all the other ones that I've forgotten about already. Is that a sufficient solid ground to stand on? That's who I am. These sort of spot memories over a course of a lifetime, and I string them all together and identify, well, that's who I am. Is that true? Is that a sufficient definition of who I am? Does it feel like it adequately represents who I am in this moment? Or is it just things that I have experienced over the course of a lifetime up to this point? But none of those things are happening in this moment, right? So even this moment, the old spiritual catchphrase, be here now, it's been around for 40, 50 years. We can notice that we can never be anywhere other than now, right? Our mind might be somewhere else. Our mind might be remembering something from the past or imagining something in the future. But when that's actually happening is always now. So in a sense, we can't ever escape from this moment, this moving sense of presence, this alive sense of presence. And even the attempt to sort of grasp that sense of presence, I'm going to be present now, that movement from, well, it's an ego-based movement. You know, I'm going to derive some benefit by remembering to be present now, imposes something on this totally impermanent moment of now that doesn't exist except in our own mind. This trying to be now is ego-based. The present moment, we are present for only in the absence of our personal self, right? When we're just present for this and this and this and this and this. And we've all experienced that. It's not it's not really a spiritual thing. It's something that when we're deeply engrossed in something, some activity, something that we love, maybe being with a lover or a child, that we're totally engrossed, totally immersed in that experience, totally present for it. We're not thinking about how to improve it. We're not thinking about something else that might happen tomorrow or something that happened last week. We're just totally in that experience. When we're totally in that experience, there's a sense of forgetting about ourselves, right? So we can be, that sense of presence arises in our absence. So this whole movement of trying to be more present, we can look at that for what it is. It is maybe a useful spiritual practice if we're having challenges just focusing our mind on the thing at hand, right? But from a deeper sense, it's just really allowing ourselves to get out of the way. You know, to relinquish that controller, that movement in ourselves that wants to be in charge, that wants to control the next moment, wants to control our experience of it, wants to control what happens tomorrow. So we can just sense into that movement in ourselves and bring it back to the original question, what am I? Is who I am fundamentally the one that needs to be in control? Is who I am fundamentally the one that defines oneself by what I did yesterday and last year and the decade before? Are we limited in that way? Does it feel sometimes like when we identify ourselves as being the person that we've thought ourselves to be all of these years, does it feel like an ill-fitting suit? Does it feel too tight, too restrictive? Does it feel like somehow we're trying to fit who we intuitively know that there's something larger there, but we feel confined by all of the beliefs of who we thought we were based on what we've been in the past. Right? So we can just really look at how that past affects our sense of who we are today. If we believe that it defines us, you know, it defines us in what we've done, what we've accomplished, what we've experienced, or what our failures have been, or what our limitations are, or what our habits that we're not fond of. You know, do those define what we are? So we can just check out to see how we're defining ourselves, to see if our picture of us today as we sit here is a function of what's gone before. So what's gone before doesn't exist in this moment, except to the extent of the mind's ability to bring it into present consciousness. So it's bringing memory into consciousness and then believing that that has current reality, that that has the ability to define what we are today. So that's we're talking about the past, right? But we do the same thing in the future, right? Future is more, it's actually more fear-based. You know, it may not feel like utter terror, but it's our desire to control the outcome in the future. So again, it's something that's not happening now, except to the extent of our minds trying to imagine what may happen or what may not happen, and trying to arrange that in our thinking, you know, to make the outcome best for me, right? So it's still ego-based, right? It's still trying to have some control, using this present moment to have some control over what that some future moment will show up as. So we can really see this movement of, you know, this desire to have things the way I want them to be, you know, to maximize my comfort, my pleasure, minimize my pain. Right? In a sense, it's a normal function. It's one of the abilities of conscious thinking to be able to use it in that way. And that's fine if it's used just as a planning tool. I'll plan to do this. It may or may not turn out that way. It's sort of planning without insisting on the outcome being any certain way. You know, so we can plan. That's fine, and then life will show up as it shows up. So we can all look back on our lives. We've all planned the future a million times. And yet life has a certain way of showing up. And I would venture that none of our lives have turned out exactly as we planned them to be. They've evolved over time. Our plans have changed. You know, hopefully they've matured. But that movement, that sense of discovery is can be a function of desire, right? In spirituality, desire is often presented as the bad guy. You know, just quash those desires and, you know, you'll be free from desires. Well, that rarely works, right? Most of the time, it just amps up those desires because we're in a fight with ourselves about what we should feel and what we actually feel. So the real solution there is just to come up with better desires, you know, not to settle for just, you know, a temporary pleasant relief, a moment of forgetting about oneself. But to use that sense of desire, because it really is a sense, it's our life energy wanting something for itself. So instead of condemning that, you know, to really look at that and use that as a path that we can follow to desire truth, to desire God, to desire to discover what I really am. That, we use that sense of desire in the wisest possible way, because that is our energy. It is our life energy. It is that sense of movement. And rather than trying to quash that, is really to see it for what it is and not squander it on petty desires. It's fine to eat ice cream once in a while, sure. But, is that our deepest desire? Or can we use that same movement also primarily for something much deeper, for an investigation? So when we can see this phrase of I am clearly, it really eliminates the past and it eliminates the future. Because whatever we are has to exist continuously. It can't be an intermittent thing, like sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. Whatever we are has a continuity to it. And we have a sense of that. We sort of interpret it as our history. I remember when I was a child and then a teenager and then a young adult. And so we intuit a continuity there, but we attribute it to a sequence of experiences. But I'd suggest that sense of continuity comes from something much deeper, comes from knowing, maybe not consciously, but knowing that there is something that is never absent. Experiences come and go, no doubt, right? Every experience comes and goes. Even really, really blissed out spiritual experiences come and go. Every experience has birth, life, and death built into it. And yet there's something that remains present for that, present for this experience, and that one fades away. It's fresh, ready, available, open for the next experience. I'm not talking about our mind here, I'm talking about our awareness of that experience. So again, coming back to that sense of I am. So it's just really two questions, right? What is I? And what is this sense of beingness, this am, in the present moment? I am. It's, we started out talking about philosophy. It's actually one of the maybe only things that we can say with absolute certainty. I am. We can say it with certainty because we can't say the opposite. We can't say, no, I don't exist, right? You have to exist to be able to claim that you don't exist. It doesn't make any sense. So it's not actually possible to claim that you don't exist. You might claim that you don't exist as a, this particular person or this body or this mental structure, yes. But to say that I don't exist, period, can't say it. Can't say it in any sense of truth. So we're left with this statement, I am, I exist. I may not know what I is, and I may not know what existence is, but there's this sense of aliveness, sense of I know that I am here. I know that there's a sense of aliveness, there's a sense of existence. I may not know what it is that's actually experiencing that, but there is a sense of it. So when we get to this point of really examining I am, philosophy can get us to that point of being willing to ask that question. It can get us to the point of being willing to, in this investigation, being willing to discard the past, being willing to discard the future, being willing to discard any concept about what I have about myself, and look at the raw fact of it. What philosophy isn't at all useful for in this moment of inquiring about I am is to then go on and create a concept about what I am, right? That's not useful at all, because a concept is just one step removed, at least one step removed from reality. And what we're looking at here is a direct investigation of what's true, what's real. And that can be lived, that can be known, not known as in knowledge, but known as in a sense of wisdom, you could say. We can know it with our whole body, but we might not be able to explain it to anybody. We can know that there's a sense of aliveness there. But it is mysterious, is it not? It's mysterious because we can't actually look at it. We can't look at it because it is what is awareness itself, consciousness itself. So that consciousness can be itself knowingly. But to step back and look at it, it becomes a concept. So even if we have the experience of awareness, consciousness, stepping into that open space where we realize that it is what's noticing everything. When we have that experience, it's very easy for the mind to come in and try to make a concept of it. Oh, that's consciousness. That's a function that I have. I can go and visit that space if I'm feeling jittery about something. But then I'll come back to my mind and judge whether that's true or real. Again, that sense of I am. So that I, what is that I? It's the, from grammar again, I see an object. I see a bird. So we have subject, a verb, see, an object. But what is that I? We imagine this bird that we see. We have this sense of seeing, that physiological sense of seeing, and then there's something that notices the product of that physiological sense. So it's really useful to see that we never actually see the bird. We see the light reflected off the bird, received by our eyes, interpreted in our mind, and noticed by awareness, let's say. So in a very real sense, we could say that the entire world, the bird and everything else, is perceived within us. The only thing that we have to perceive the outside world are the senses that this body is endowed with. So whatever stimulus may happen, let's say out there, it's only really sensed inside this body, right? So in a very real way, we could say that the world happens within us. We think just the opposite. We think we are this skin-tight entity that walks around in a big world. That's what we believe, that's what we were taught. And then we were also taught that this function that we now call consciousness is a byproduct of the cells in our brain. But when we really go to looking at it closely, can we really be sure of that? Again, there's this movement outward, you could say, I seeing the world, the bird. But what is this I exactly that notices that? What is that sense of being conscious of the product in our head? And that's a mysterious, amazing, let's just say capability. It's not something we possess, but it's something that we notice, we can notice, even though it's functioning all the time. We rarely separate it from that seeing. We think seeing and that awareness of it are all sort of happening in the brain. But when we really start looking, we can see that there's something of a fundamentally different dimension that notices the product in our heads. That noticing of what is seen, the noticing of the thought, noticing of the feeling, the noticing of the pain in my foot, all of that is somehow, you could almost say, projected onto this consciousness. So if we're looking at something that is most fundamental, surely whatever it is that notices all of whatever occurrence is happening, that's worthy of investigation. Is that consciousness, is that fundamental? Without consciousness, you wouldn't have any idea whether the world existed, didn't exist, whether your body existed, whether it didn't exist. Consciousness is required. And it's a gift that's already been given to us, right? It's not something that we have to earn. It's something that's already functional, amazingly. But it's also something that we rarely give it credit for, because it just is happening. It's just present, right? It's not arguing about what should and shouldn't happen. The mind does that. Consciousness is present for the whole show. Consciousness isn't judging our thoughts, our habits, what we've done, what we haven't done. Consciousness is just present, right? Like the most loyal friend you've ever had, non-judgmental, there for you full time. What more could you ask? So the sense of I am is this I, this place that we identify with, this sense of continuity that's there. It's worthy of investigation. Could that sense be anchored in awareness? Could it be that awareness is what I am? Most of us start out in spirituality and we look for an improved version of ourselves, a higher self, right? I mean, that's fine. But when we get into looking at it more deeply, we begin to realize that there's something here that is not a function of this personal self. Something deeper than that. At first it can seem a little bit barren, a little bit stark, like, okay, consciousness. Okay, I get it. I'm consciousness, but where's the juice? It can feel like that at first, right? Because our mind has been trained to look for the next pleasure, next bit of excitement, the next novel thing, more. We're so used to that. I mean, we're a bit addictive in that way to this sense of more and more. And so to come back to something like consciousness, it's like, yeah, okay, where's the payoff for me, right? That's what it can feel like. People have even come across it and, in a waking up kind of way, and had that reaction like, well, what's in it for me? And the answer, of course, is not much. It's something, this whole movement to awaken is basically a movement to give up everything that we thought we were to become something that we always were. Simple. Not easy, but simple. But we find out, it's like when you first walk into a dark room, you may not see anything in there very clearly, but after a while your eyes get used to it and you see that there's actually things occupying the room. You'll be able to see your way around as your eyes get attuned to that. When we first encounter consciousness, it can be an enormous, doesn't have to be, but it can be an explosive sense of relief. Oh, that's what I am. I'm not constrained to this thought-based idea of myself with all my frailties and shortcomings and negative karma that I'll have to work out in some future life. We find out that no, that's not who we actually are. Huge relief. And then things settle in and we have that sense of, okay, there's consciousness there, everything's good, except feels a little dry. But that's it. If you felt that, it's really life insisting that you empty your cup completely. It's not like you can experience this awareness and then go back to just being an egoic self that can talk about having the experience of awareness. That has a limited payoff, and eventually just turns it into the next concept. So what I'm talking about here is really a deep emptying of our personal will. So that sense of I am is maybe revealed in a flash, but the implications of it may take some time, may take some years, actually, because we're talking about really restructuring the whole identity, the whole sense of where we abide. And that movement to recognize that where we actually abide is something beyond this body-mind, something much deeper than that. Still functioning through this body-mind, there's still a sense of operating, seeing things out of these eyes, hearing things out of these ears, sure. Consciousness operating through this particular body-mind has a sense of looking through these eyes. Same consciousness operating through another body-mind has a sense of looking through those eyes. So as we investigate this sense of I am more and more deeply, we've discovered that there's actually less and less to hold on to. It's not that we come up with a really good concept about ourselves and that's somehow satisfactory. It is a process of stripping away everything that we thought we were. Even the really, really good ideas, concepts about who we thought we were, things that we want to hold on to, not ready to give up. I'm an intelligent person. I am a lovable person. Wonderful. Great. But this movement to recognize what we actually are is a movement of towards freedom, you could say. Freedom from all identities. It sounds like a negative thing, but it's actually a freeing thing. It's a freedom to be present for the next situation, the next moment, fresh, without preconceptions, without coming to the table with an agenda, with a idea of something that I need to protect about myself or project about myself. No, I am simple. It's helpful to know that deepest sense of I am isn't something that we improve. It's something that we discover. We discover the implications of it at a deeper and deeper level. It is complete in itself already, in all of us, as all of us, okay? So this personal self, as we go through life, hopefully we mature, we get a little, better at social interactions, we get, more clarity in terms of how to function in the world. That's all useful. But it doesn't actually have anything to do with the recognition of what I am. So a legitimate question is, well, if it's just a recognition of what we are already, what's the big deal? I'd heard all these stories about enlightenment, perpetual bliss. Yeah. I mean, there can be bliss. I would characterize it more as contentment. It's not a mind-blowing bliss that lasts forever. That's an imagination. It may feel like that when it's first encountered, but like any experience, that settles down. We become acquainted with a different perspective. So it's still the same perspective, but it doesn't have that mind-blowing overlay to it, which is actually somewhat dysfunctional if you're trying to live life as well. So we can allow that sense of I am just to allow that to be an open question and to use it as an inquiry. The valuable way to work with that question is not to repeat it as a mantra, right, over and over and over again. Try to dumb down your mind enough that it stops, but to really be inquisitive about it. Like, I really want to know what this is. I'm living my life. I'm doing my things. I'm getting up every morning, but what is it that's doing that? Maybe I'm meditating every day. Well, who is it that's meditating? That's actually a much better question than how do I stop my mind? You could ask the question, who is it that wants to stop my mind? Right? Right? I mean, that's just an ego thought, right? I want to stop my mind. Why? Because I think there's some spiritual benefit. To who? To me. So we can just see that movement and just really come back to that question of I am. Just allow it to percolate, penetrate, and not use it as a question that requires an answer. I mean, that's how we've been taught that questions are for, right? You ask a question, the teacher does, you're expected to give an answer. You're expected to sound intelligent. But in this endeavor, it doesn't work like that. The purpose of a really good question is to take you beyond the mind into a mystery, into a territory beyond conceptual thought. The mind is great at conceptual thinking, it's useful, but that usefulness can get us to a certain point of realizing that the mind has a limit, and its limit is conceptual thought. That's useful information. And we can just inquire beyond that, like, well, okay, but is that my only way to interact with life? Is just through thinking about life? And that's what most philosophers end up with, thinking about life, okay? Secondhand knowledge. What we're talking about here is a direct experience of what we are fundamentally, which is something that all of us can have the direct experience of. It's not actually an experience, but that's the best word I can come up with. The direct sense, the full body sense of I am here, I'm present, there's an alive existence here, and that is beyond all attributes. Beyond all ways that we might choose to define ourselves. Because it's what witnesses, notices every attempt that we have to define ourselves. It's what notices every memory that's dredged out of the past into this present moment. It's what notices every imagination about the future. That we conjure up in this present moment. It's beyond all of that. It doesn't have a form. It's not a thing. We can't step back and look at it. It's just present. It's present in our absence. If we try to look at it, it's like trying to grasp air. It just sort of slips out of our hand. But when we're willing to stop, not try to stop, but just allow all of the mind's tendencies to go to memory, future, judgments, opinions, concepts, all that tendency, just to see that for what it is. You can't make it go away, but you can see that it's not actually a fundamental reality. When we see that really clearly, it drops away more and more by itself. We don't have to make it go away. We try to make it go away, we're empowering it. That doesn't work. We can just see, well, it's not actually where reality lies. It's not where I am is located. It includes that. The I am can be present for it. The awareness is aware of even our mind's tendencies, but it's already beyond that. So this consciousness is something that exists. It already exists fully, doesn't need our improvement. It just needs our recognition. Our personal life, yeah, sure. It improves over time, hopefully. If we have a fairly functional ego going, it's helpful, right? It helps us get by in the world. It helps us it helps this deeper life energy consciousness to move more effectively in the world. Wonderful. So it's not a bad thing. It's just not the same as awakening. So awakening is just awakening to what we actually are already.